Critical infrastructure is being restricted. Why? Because of this Prime Minister's failure. I've asked the Prime Minister to meet with me and the other opposition leaders in good faith to try to find a way forward from this impasse. He didn't answer yesterday. He hasn't answered to date. I'm going to ask him again. Will he meet with us?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada has spent the last 2 weeks endorsing and enabling these blockades across the country. The leader of the Conservative Party and her team have been their biggest champions, even promoting their fundraising. The consequences of these actions are having dire impacts. They're impacting trade, they're hurting jobs, they're threatening our economy, and they're obstructing our communities. I am focused on ending it. I hope the Leader of the Opposition will maintain her current position and continue to call for an end to these blockades.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Continues to blame others for things that he's responsible for. Today, he actually has a chance to do something for Canadians. We have a motion before this House that would tell the government to let Canadians know when they are going to end these restrictions. 2 years into this pandemic, and given the current circumstances, it's not an unreasonable request. Canadians deserve a Prime Minister who's willing to follow science and lift the restrictions. Even his own Liberal MPs agree with us. So a simple question for the Prime Minister. Will he and his fellow Liberal members of Parliament support our motion that is on the floor today?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, everyone in this country is sick and tired of lockdowns and, quite frankly, of COVID-19. But Canadians also know that the way through this pandemic is by listening to science, is by following public health advice, and indeed by getting vaccinated. That is what we have been focused on from the very beginning, and that's why we're continuing to encourage Canadians to please get vaccinated. About 61,000 Canadians got their first dose just last week. We need more people to continue to step up, get vaccinated, get their kids vaccinated, get the booster shot. That's how we stay safe. That's how we support our frontline health workers.
The Leader of the Opposition.
So I have a question for the Prime Minister, because he's talking about vaccinations. We all support vaccines, and 90%, as he has said, 90% of Canadians have been vaccinated. Yep. Is he suggesting that unless 100% of Canadians are vaccinated, he's not even going to consider opening up and lifting restrictions? Yeah. Is that what he's trying to tell us? 90% is good for us, and I would say other countries in the world who have less vaccine uptake. Is he saying he's not going to do anything until 100% of Canadians are vaccinated? Really?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, not only are Canadians tired of this pandemic, of the challenges we're facing, but they are also, of course, tired of the restrictions, tired of the rules, tired of the lockdowns. That is understandable. But you know what helps lift restrictions? You know what helps move beyond lockdowns? Vaccinations. When Canadians get vaccinated, including with our vaccine mandates that ensure the federal public service and anyone getting on planes or trains are vaccinated, that has helped move forward, keep Canadians safe, and most importantly, to keep our frontline health workers who've been heroes during this pandemic from being overwhelmed.
Honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear an answer from the Prime Minister. Canada has one of the highest vaccination rates in the world. Over 90% are vaccinated, as the Prime Minister has said himself. Does the Prime Minister expect 100% of Canadians to be vaccinated, to start to think about presenting a reopening plan for our economy and for ending extreme measures? The question is clear. Is that the Prime Minister's objective, to wait for 100% of Canadians to be vaccinated to start giving people hope again? Yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada has spent the past 2 weeks approving and encouraging these protests across Canada. The Conservatives were their biggest spokespeople. They even helped to fundraise for these blockades, and this has had a disastrous impact our jobs, our businesses, blockades in communities have hurt families. And I hope that the Conservative Party will continue with their current position today and continue to call for an end to these blockades. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I hope that the Prime Minister won't hide away once again like he did for the past 2 weeks, and he will be present so that he can speak and listen and make sure that we can end these protests. We want these to end. We want the end of these protests to end, but we want him to commit to presenting a plan to Canadians. We want this Prime Minister make sure that all levels of government here in Canada present a reopening plan to the population. How come he is still refusing to listen to Canadians and to present a plan and to give Canadians a bit of hope? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to hear the honourable member to condemn and calling for an end of the blockades today in this House, and I hope he will be able to convince his colleagues at the Conservative Party as well to stop supporting and encouraging these blockades and these protesters that are hurting businesses, jobs, and supply chains, and they're also hurting Canadians who live in these communities across the country. These blockades have to end. The Conservative Party has to be clear on that. The honourable member for Bergen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I asked the Prime Minister for a meeting. The leader of the official opposition asked the party leaders to meet. Given the troubling developments in Ottawa and across Canada right now, there are significant economic impacts and impacts for our public health and also growing public security issues. Can the Prime Minister call the party leaders together to a meeting, an emergency meeting? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Inaudible for the interpreter. I am in close contact with our partners at various levels of government. We're having conversations with other parliamentarians, and I'm very happy to hear the leader of the Bloc to give him a briefing on the situation that people are facing right now here in Ottawa and across the country. We are going to continue to remain focused on the end of these blockades and on the work we have to do to protect our economy and to support our communities across the country. The member for Bergen. The briefing that I would like to hear from all of the other leaders. There is obstructions taking place at the 911 call center. There are also obstructions at the Ottawa airport, and things are growing increasingly difficult. A friend of my father's said we couldn't put out the fire. Can the Prime Minister put out this fire? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, this government is taking action every day to reduce our impact, the impact of these blockades on the economy. We are here working with the Ontario government, with whom I spoke a great deal last night, and we're going to continue to do the work needed to make sure that Canadians from across this country are not bothered or affected by these blockades that are illegal.
Member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, we're in the second week of the siege in Ottawa. We've got borders that are shut down across the country, including Coots and the Ambassador Bridge. This is hurting workers, truckers, small businesses, and families. We've got a Prime Minister who's more focused on debating whose jurisdiction it is. Clearly, making sure our borders are open is a responsibility of the federal government. So will the Prime Minister stop hiding behind jurisdiction and fix this mess?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, we have been there to support all levels of government and the work we needed to do.
I'd like the Prime Minister to start over. They were applauding so much for his answer, I mean, they couldn't hear it. The Right Honourable Prime Minister, please go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning of this crisis around blockades in Ottawa and elsewhere, we've been working closely with partners on the ground. We've been furnishing resources. We've been furnishing RCMP officers. We've been furnishing tactical supports as we move forward through this. We understand how important it is to put an end to these barricades. We understand how important it is for people to get their lives back, to be able to get their livelihoods back. That's why we're calling upon the Conservative Party that has for the past 2 weeks been enabling, supporting, and cheering on these blockades to stay consistent in saying that they have to end, that we have to get our lives back, all of us as Canadians.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Burnaby South. This is the second week of the siege in Ottawa, and we have borders across the country that are blocked by these convoy protests. Instead of solving issues that are affecting all workers, Canadians, and truckers, we have a Prime Minister that wants to debate jurisdiction. It's clear there's no debate here. There's federal work to be done to make sure that our borders are working. So, will the Prime Minister stop debating jurisdiction and solve this issue? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of this crisis, we've worked hand in hand with various jurisdictions by offering the necessary resources, whether it's in terms of RCMP officers or technical supports. We're going to continue to respect jurisdiction, but to be there at every stage to do everything that's needed to end these blockades. Unfortunately, we can't say the same thing for the Conservatives. Over the past 2 weeks, they have been encouraging and applauded these blockades and even making calls for funding for them. It is time for this to end because it's hurting Canadians.
Member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government continues to use vaccines as a political weapon rather than a tool. Unlike other governments, they can't seem to figure out how to move forward. We don't need more job vacancies or supply chain issues. Canada and Canadians need to get back to normal. Instead of creating new vaccine mandates for federally regulated workplaces, will this minister listen to the science and his MPs and move towards lifting these mandates?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so pleased to answer to this question speaking about vaccination. The Prime Minister mentioned just a moment ago that 80% of Canadians of all ages have received their full doses. Now, about 10,000 every day more Canadians are getting their first vaccine. 55% have received a booster dose. Every day, 180,000 people in Canada receive a booster dose. And we have approximately 50% of children between 5 and 11 being vaccinated. About 6,000 of them every day receive their first dose.